But I have a show of hands of 2 or 3 people are willing to actually open up Etherpad and add to it the Etherpad.
Okay, great.
Wonderful. So the Etherpad is tools.IETF.org/WG/I2RS/minutes. Thank you. Minutes? That's my pen. Let's wait till they actually get the thing open. Actually, steal this for a second. Yep.
Is this the read one? Or do you want me to open it up and read that?
Actually, there's on the screen.
Okay, so here's the link. As soon as you guys have it open, I'll take it away and we can get started.
Go to the I2RS page, click on the wiki,
Tools.
click on the tools page, click on the wiki page, and you'll find it.
Yeah, you get to it by starting minutes.
But this is under the tools page.
Can you see through the back of the photos? Yeah.
I think that's as good as it's going to get.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give it back to you.
Back to me. It's on the tools page. I was incorrect. Minutes.
Minutes.
Yeah, minutes. Go to minutes. Good. Howard. Okay. Looks like I can do this. Either spot. Maybe I'll stand. Okay, I'm going to do the agenda, and then I think can you manage the slide forwarding. I think. Okay. So the other one brought up. Hold on. I'll do the agenda and then I'll swap it for you. Okay, this is the agenda that's on the web. We'll start out with chair slides, the requirements, go through model status, and then we'll have a good long section to talk about our current understanding on the protocol design. Andy Bierman is remotely. Is Kent Watson in the room? Maybe it was a late night last night, so it's late. Hopefully he'll join us, and then we'll go through some hackathon stuff. Okay, let me pick up, and then I'll stand in the little box as a good demonstration of what all sorts of people should do. Hi, Genghis. Welcome. Okay, so this is really interactive. And yes, I had a moment and did graphical slides. Welcome to it. Okay, I'm going to restate some high-level things that we've noted at I2S all along, but just to remind you what we were trying to do when we started. So I2S is really built for the high performance. We're not working on CLIs on small boxes. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so nice, cool pictures, but our concepts were that we were going to be programmatic, that we were going to have ephemeral state, that we were going to have high-speed publication and subscription stream. Okay, this will move. Cool. But we will have traceability, and that we'll have some configuration, but lots of analytics. What we have so far is we've really been working on the configuration because the ephemeral state has been the issue we ran up against first. But I want to remind us that that wasn't what we really started out all of this to do. That conf works just fine for a lot of configuration, but we were looking for configuration that was targeted for high speed and combined with analytics. And so some of the next things I'll say will not make sense unless you remember that. We also wanted to have 80% probably analytics, 20% configuration, multiple streams. There's also, you can sit up at the front if you want to type. Don't feel shy about moving around when I start to talk. That won't bother anyone. And we wanted to make sure we had operator needs. We want to make sure we talk to the operations community and say, okay, NetConf wasn't doing everything you needed and other things weren't doing needed. We built this beginnings. Tell us if we really have something right. Let's together work together and find our first killer applications. Okay, next one. Okay, so
It's you.
Yeah.
I have a question. Dan Bogdanovich, you said 80% analytics, 20% configuration. But, you know, in order to have a closed loop, these things are very tight because
Yes.
the results of the analytics lead into the new configurational actions and vice versa. So it's a closed loop. So when you say 80-20, what do you mean by that?
Sure, let me pick that up. We need a certain amount of base configuration. That's what we've worked at, but we're not going to redo all the MIBs that are out. We're not going to redo all the subjects of the MIBs and the Yang models. We're going to put ephemeral state where we need it. So that's sort of the 80-20 rule I meant. We hope that there's a lot of program and analytics that come up. So I wanted to give the sense that we're not worried about as much of it. If the 80-20 rule causes you problem, tell me why, and take it as sort of a guideline or some general chair's musings. Okay, I mean, was that good enough explanation? Okay. I think all of us who have worked so hard in the last year deserve, did I skip a slide there? Would you go back up? Okay, one more. One more.
Is it?
Okay, I must have missed something. Okay, it'll be in another slide. I had to thank, go back down. Oh, hit no. Like, comment on that. Go down. What I wanted to do is say thank you for all the people who've been working so hard. Let me go through what we tried. Let's skip through this and go to the next one. Okay, so what we wanted to build with the I2RS was a new DNA. We wanted to be model driven and start with initial models that covered the territory and some analytics to begin with, and then continue to make sure we had operational analytics. We want to find that first killer apps, and we want to go on to make 80% analytics. What I really mean by that is we want to not be the next, or we want to be the thing that the operators come to or that people come to create that next high-speed analytic program. Okay, questions? Go ahead.
So you said 80% analytic, right? 20% configuration. Is it more for dynamic configuration, right? Dynamic policy, right?
All of our stuff is dynamic policy and dynamic configuration.
So why can't we say dynamic policy based on the applications initiated by the application? Why we call configuration? Configuration, traditionally, the connotation is you configure, you stay, you leave, stay there.
Good comment. Good
Okay.
comment. I really want to make, I'd assume we understood it was dynamic configuration, dynamic policy, but I really wanted to emphasize in this particular piece the fact we want to make it useful for people to run their network and analyze their network.
Okay, so for the 80% analytic, so then that means I2RS is going to shift more towards letting routers switches to sending out information.
Go through
Okay.
that in just a minute. Give me one more moment and I will say what this means.
And Sue?
Yep.
Comment from Andy on Jabber. He wants to agree with Dan that NetConf does have a loose loop right now, around 5 seconds, and this is new where the loop is going to be tight in the millisecond range.
Did everybody hear what Andy said? Everybody hear Jeff? Okay, want to repeat it to the mic?
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Everybody hearing?
Okay, good.
Because this is important from Andy.
So Andy's saying that this is where things are different from NetConf. NetConf currently has a loose loop around 5 seconds, and that our requirements are trying to make this tighter around millisecond range.
Okay, we're just trying to make sure you have the proper expectation. Next one. Now, okay, I had a couple comments that people shared to me with operators in their review of NetConf was, I don't need another config mechanism. They wanted to make sure we kept the config and analytics, although I talked to another operator last night who said, I just want a way to quickly put down policy dynamically. I want an easier way to do that. So that emphasizes Linda's comment, and Linda's heard from, I suspect, other operationals. So another thing that I'm privy to is, because I'm the IDR co-chair, I've learned how much is coming into FlowSpec, which is another way to put policy. So, and Robert laughs. So I really had focused us in the first drafts on configuration. I think we need to widen that to analytics in our drafts. Okay, next issue. Okay, so what can we hit no and yeah, okay. Finish what I want us to do in looking at this, and I'm not sure if I used an 80-20 rule because I'm used to talking to my bosses who talk about 80-20 rules or things, but what we really need to do, we've gone a tremendous way in the last year. You know, you have to look back and say we've pretty much nailed the architecture and the requirements and the problem statement and the first round of all the data models, and we've begun to get a protocol discussion going. That's great progress for the year. So how do we work on this progress and push some of that over the line? We need to continue to work with NetConf and RESTConf and NetMod folks to get the ephemeral additions in. We need to see that the traceability and PubSub and configurations are followed through. Those gratefully, thanks to our good NetConf chairs, they picked up a lot of this PubSub work. NetConf chairs, want to raise hands? Yeah, thanks to these guys. They picked up a lot of the work and worked creatively with us. Thanks to Andy, Kent Watson, and all the design team. We need to currently think about augmenting our protocol-independent models with analytics. Right now, the RIB has RPCs to add and delete. If you think we need to have an analytic, meaning do we need read-only status? I don't see any operational status, which is actually there for I2RS. And we need to augment the basic protocols. Go ahead, Dan.
Dan Bogdanovich, with regarding to the data models with the analytics, the open config group guys and the operational state, they are covering some of that materials. I mean, some of those issues, and that can be a good starting point. And some other working groups are working on on that already.
That's right. We're only looking at the ephemeral additions we want for our protocol independent models. Go ahead, Ben.
But isn't operational state by nature ephemeral? It's constantly changing, and once you reboot, there is
It's gone.
I agree that operational state is continuously ephemeral, but we may have within the IR2S RIBs operational state which is associated with the work we're doing. If we don't have anything we think has to be there, we'll go on. Okay, but I want people to consider whether, Jeff and I have funneled us down to getting a config and RPCs to add and delete, and not really looked at any operational state which might be unique to R2S. I will do a call on the working group list to say, is there anything like this we should add to the RIB data model? Is there anything like that we should add to the topology model? And what do we think about it? If we don't have anything, we go on. This is not a long debate. This is stopping and asking to see if we can finish it.
So if I could jump in. So the problem that we're running into with operational state across IETF right now is IETF is very focused today on configurations. Most of the models that are coming up have a small amount of operational state. It's starting to expand. The open config guys are trying to suggest structure to the operational state, and that's still a useful conversation. The problem that we have being sort of at this cusp of trying to have some ephemeral configuration, which may have ephemeral state associated with those models, is that the things that we should publish as part of I2RS will be changing based on what the base models of the things that we extend are. So by example, if the netmod routing config module, which is largely config and operational state for the RIB, happens to contain state that if we program ephemeral state and it gets reflected in their operational model, we need to add nothing. So there will be some amount of back and forth over the next year or so as operational state is introduced in other models. And if we need to add something specifically for our purposes, that's great. But part of the thing the working group should be considering is when you see something that is useful in I2RS context, ask yourself, is it really just base operational state that should go into more of a core model outside of I2RS? And that's okay.
So Dan's comment is well taken. If it belongs someplace else, let it go there. If you think something else, what does this mean for the I2RS working group? I'm going to make a call on each of the RIBs to consider that. We'll consider it, and then we'll go on to close the first version of the models. I don't want us, this is not waiting forever, because these Yang models will iterate. Fortunately, with good tools like ODM has, although I have a description with the hackathon, I'll go through later in the discussion. We should be able to spin out a new model, have it picked up by people who are developing and actually plugged into the code. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to change is we had not considered base other routing protocol I2S models in I2S. We're not getting as much kickstarting in other working groups, so I'm going to suggest we have room to say, bring those models to I2S. Of course, they must be reviewed and probably adopted in either I2S or the protocol group. Probably the protocol group is the right place. But we'll at least kickstart it. We'll get a review. We'll send it to it with I2S's, gee, we've reviewed it. This is a really good idea. And that sometimes puts you a little ahead in the queue. And if you have BGP models, I can assure you, I'll help you there. Go ahead, Dan.
Sorry.
No, this is great.
So when you said with ephemeral state, it's which parts you really want to augment? You want to add operational state to the to the protocols, or
Both.
Again, it's where it makes sense. So one of the problems with I2RS is when we started as a BOF, there was no such thing as all this stuff. Now IETF as a whole is picking up a huge amount of this work. Less things need to be done in I2RS context. The thing that is still, I think, an open question, and again, is I2RS may be motivating the work, but it may actually be picked up elsewhere. A lot of our things like pub/sub, additional export formats, things that are better export formats for telemetry that may use a Yang data model for modeling, but may use netconf, it may use protobufs, it may use other formats for exporting things, or as Jamal would point out, even forces. Being able to send out the data is the important thing. Having a common modeling format is important. The speed is also important. We're motivated by the stuff in our charter to actually have that speed, but I think IETF as a whole is starting to pick up this as a thing that needs to be solved. We're just sort of motivating it, and it'll happen here potentially first.
Benoit says if he was successful with the Yang work, it would get adopted in every working group in the IETF. He's seeing a great uptake in the routing area. I2RS and ephemeral state is like the same thing. If we're really successful, it will get picked up many places. Okay, so if you have drafts for BGP or some of the other protocols, go ahead and bring them into the list for discussion so that we can encourage this work to go faster in the IETF. Okay, and last, we will be I really encourage open source applications and killer applications if you have it. So we will start to take reports of what people have done, how they might be doing that type of work, even if it's pre-I2S protocol, if you've done something like it. I know that Hari did early work on I2S rib model, and that really helped bring it along quickly. We tried something at the hackathon, which I'll go back over at the end of the discussion. Just getting real live examples and real killer applications. So what's the bottom line? We want to start with operational needs. We want to create multiple streams. We've been focused on creating the stream that does netconf configuration. As even in our discussions with netconf, we might use something like IPFix for some of the data because some of the data will be better. Question, please go ahead. Name first.
Jeffrey John from Juniper.
Wonderful, Jeffrey. I now see you in person.
Okay, so the killer app, what do you think could become a killer app? Do you have any thoughts, insight on there?
I'm chopping with the operators or with people who use it. You know, I'm not someone who's operating at this point or someone who's actually going to be using it. So don't ask me, ask an operator, ask someone who might be doing it.
Okay.
I'm not going to be the judge. The judge will be the operators say to vendors, I must have, or say to new companies, I must have, or say to open sources, this is a great project. Not my thing.
Subscriber management is by nature, you know, it's ephemeral. Most of the stuff there for each subscriber.
Yeah.
Okay. A follow-up comment on earlier comment about configuration confusion. I see that's one of the slides about operator comments feedback. Also, they also kind of confused by the configuration. So maybe we can call it control instead of configuration. Just
changing the name could be fine. Another thing I'll try to do is get out to the operator forums and see if I can get some help, either you know, tapping friends who might be going to RIPE or going to NOG. Those may be helpful to just get the word out.
Sue?
Go ahead.
Actually, to sort of follow up, one of the reasons we're calling this configuration state is we have two audiences for this stuff. We have sort of the general purpose operator, you know, the user of this stuff will want to call it one thing that makes sense to them. Based on the things that we're trying to do, we've been trying to actually use terminology that's consistent from what's inside of the netconf group. So from a netconf context, this is configuration. I understand this is not necessarily configuration from a user perspective, but we're trying to keep our vocabulary clean because this is our main point of interaction with the rest of IETF right now.
So this is Linda. I just want to give you an example of those killer apps, and this is really the reality today. For example, DDoS attack, right? See, in the DOTS working group under security, they're working on this application where I'm under attack, please help me. So this message sent to the analytic tool who's actually to mitigate the DDoS attack. And one of the action could be asking router to give me some information about the traffic patterns. I have this destination is under attack and it's traffic statistics or traffic, some kind of telemetry to send to me. So that's one of the examples.
Yes, and Russ White in our initial work on R2S had that idea as well. So you can see that from the original use cases, that's one of our hot ones. So I hope we'll come out with a killer app. Next slide.
I think that's it.
Okay.
Deepak Kumar, Cisco.
Hi, Diva.
Hey, so one of the killer app, what I can see is that actual performance of each routing protocol, how they behave under different routing patterns, like New Relic and all do. They can tell you how well your code is performing.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to the next agenda. We're running just a little bit, I think, behind, but the comments are more important. We need your feedback. You know, this is a big, thank you guys. You've accomplished the first round of goals in the working group, and we're sort of at the end, so we're going to the second goals. Add persons, you know, lots of really good comments on the list, lots of hard work by lots of individuals.
I'll let you drive.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly, because we did requirements in a talkative portion at Prague, I'm going to tell you the summation of where we came to with the requirements. So if you're real deep into the requirements, like maybe Dan or Agnes or the AD or the NetConf chairs, sort of sit back, relax, and watch. We did a working group last call on the ephemeral state pub sub traceability and protocol security. Pub sub and traceability had been working group called last June, but we wanted to make sure everything was consistent. And I hope I was really clear that because we were doing a second working group call on the pub sub and the traceability, it didn't change its status. It just asked, did we make all the requirements fit? Next. Oh, and the security requirements were not protocol security requirements, but the the draft MLGT I2RS was adopted as a security requirement. And I needed that to provide the security ADs with the environment that R2S is in order to send forward the architecture document. So the reason the architecture document has been sort of sitting there is I needed the security environment response to the ISG. Next one. Okay, so I'm just going to whip through ephemeral state, Yang changes identity, priority, pub sub, security requirements. By the way, this comes from Mahesh's and maybe Mehmet's slides from IETF93, but I've augmented them. Okay, next one. Okay, ephemeral state. Now this one I added a picture because I'm going to say this carefully. Jürgen was right. You can quote me. For those of you, it took me a while to understand Jürgen, but if we look at panes of glass, Jürgen has always said you should be looking at panes of glass theoretically to try to get through this. Now, what does panes of glass mean?
You can go old school. Here's an umbrella.
Okay, well, I may have to use an umbrella. I thought these things had a
Not unless you brought one with you.
okay, it's got a green light. Okay. Nope, okay. So I will use my hand and gesture wildly. Thank you. I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. Well, it's the same device. How do you start that?
It's on. Just hit the green. No, the button at the top that has the green.
This hand? Okay, I got it. No problem. That. It's the same one. Okay, so I got 2 pointers. Okay, this will be great. I love left and right. Okay. So first of all, consider config a set of nodes. Excuse me, I'll try to do this in real time. Consider config a set of nodes we have been working on at the bottom. And consider that the base things are configured are Z1, Z2, and Z3. So that's the base configure. But we're going to look through a pane of glass, and by this, assume you had 3 window panes and you were looking through it. We really do look at things that are going through. Now, let's assume one ephemeral has priority 3 and is ephemeral true. and has 3 nodes, X1, X2, X3, and X4. If you looked all the way from this top thing all the way down to the config and wanted to approach it, the ephemeral would have to make a change down here to add X4 as Z6. That's just looking through. I want to have a BGP cost community. It isn't there. I leak it all the way through. Okay. The same is true if you want to change the nodes that were there at top. And here I've drawn lines where you would go all the way from X1 to X3 as you change a variable. Again, let's assume that's an interface. You wanted to change the interface, something. Am I losing everybody, Joel?
I think you may be losing people, but I have to ask a different question.
Sure, go ahead.
At the last interim phone discussion that I was on, we discussed panes of glass, and representing config as one pane and ephemeral as a second pane is fine. I think you're going to make things much more confused trying to talk about 2 levels of ephemeral panes.
Okay.
I don't think we should see that.
Okay.
It doesn't work.
Whether it works or not, whether it works or not, I agree with you that I'm seeing too many lost looks in the room. So let me try a simpler model. Joel, we'll get into people who claim it works and claim it doesn't. I'm not going to go there. So let me get to the, I was trying to educate you on the whole ephemeral piece. Come and see me afterwards if you're interested, and I'll explain how the pots, explain that first diagram. Thank you, Joel, for correcting me on helping me not lose too many people. If we have one pane of glass, and thank you again for my ephemeral here, and here we have the config. That's what we mean by 2 panes of glass. The original config down here is what was configured, and that would have been Z1, Z2, Z3. When we
things would go wrong if you did something and then the world suddenly decided you hadn't done it.
Will the note takers please put inside of the notes, Sue needs to follow up on this object. I think that's a clear way, Joel, that I really needed. Thank you.
From a lawful intercept perspective, it should be a may, because if it's a must, you are running into, then you will have a broken protocol all the time.
Okay.
It does. It does.
We can talk off.
Okay.
I believe it doesn't cause a problem.
Okay, and that was Eric's comment as well. So lawful intercept, note takers, please put that down. Please, I do not know your name, I apologize.
Jason Stern. When you have I guess this might go back to your panes of glass model, but if you have a lower priority client who writes to a node,
Yes,
value A, and then a higher priority client writes to the same node, value B,
yes,
then B takes precedence.
that's correct.
Then the higher priority client removes his config. Is the server supposed to reinstall the
No,
lower priority value?
no,
Okay, so we're not storing multiple copies.
we're not storing
of
multiple
leaves.
copies.
Okay, thanks.
No multiple copies. Okay, next one. Thank you, Joel. Okay. Ignore the top one. I simply want, Jeff, can you go back to the one that has two panes so I can not confuse people? Okay. So I am now going to enter in one concept for you that I will try in my, thank you, dual lighted feature. Up here, it could be an ephemeral state, and down here in the config that certain things are working together. A route has a next hop and an interface. Those are three things that you might want to have bound together. If they're added all together and overwrite the config, we call this a grouping. Just going to call that a term. Now, if you will go back to where I was. Next down. Next up. I'm sorry. Bad. Oh, okay. Go up from there. Nope, down. I'm sorry. I can't remember where I put it. Next. Okay. I guess I didn't put it in there. Actually, I think it's down one more. I'm sorry. There. Okay, not at all. I will just try it in person, and I'll try to, note takers, have me talk about the all or nothing. On the list, we had a discussion of whether we should do this portion of config with the all or nothing or with the continue on air or stop on air. And I want to remind you that we had the all or nothing case. And this means either all the changes in a group go in or they don't.
There is a third case, because you can, it's a hybrid mode where you are defining if those changes are atomic or not. So you should be able to group certain changes and saying that if these groups are passing, this is fine, but if other fail, you can keep the previous ones.
Okay. Well, the note takers.
It is all about the atomicity of the changes that you're doing.
I understand the atomicity. Atomicity. Will the note takers put in atomicity? Sue needs to discuss atomicity on the list. Great input. What we determined right now, that multi-layer confusing thing that Joel said, could be a description of caching. We declared it out of scope. We're trying to get something out. Okay, next. Error handling. That's where I put it. Grouping of nodes that should align. Again, whether they're a group that must work together or whether they're atomic. Atomic is non-grouped. Oh, good. I had it in another way. So group data must done together, BGP, static routes, cost community, interface addition, and routes. Non-group data can be done atomically. If you stop on error and continue on error, assume non-group data. Did I do that one right, Joel? Yep. Okay. If it doesn't hit your error flag. Okay, next one. Okay, skip that one. Now, examples of error handling, routes added for denial of service. the I2S client be able to do checks on routes. It could remove referential checks. I think I've gone through all this. Go ahead. Support for partial writes. One of the things that helped us in this is NetConf doesn't have mandated sequencing, and without mandated sequencing, NetConf can't handle partial writes. There are things that may change that, but it's just what it is today. RESTConf has a complete set of operations per message, and RESTConf can support multiple data messages. Okay. I think I've done this, rel. Yang changes, ephemeral, good. Next, identity and requirements. R2S agents can have identities, clients can have second identities. How it's carried is sort of an open issue, but it's considered one of the issues that are still open even in the presentation we have here. So it's just could be carried as metadata, it could be carried as another data. And it goes in as part of the tonification and log, because you want the reason the secondary identity or the baked ID is just if you have several applications working through one client, you can say it's application 1, hi, I'm the one that's pulling logs, or hi, I'm the one that's supposed to change the ephemeral state. If you get configurations from the guy that's doing logs, you might want to worry if that caused an error in the network. Okay. Next one, priority requirements are supported as write conditions, keep going. And signaling requirements, you may have a read only that has ephemeral, hence your writes, okay?
And to be clear about this one, this is actually from the Yang library module. That is a specific document that is out of the NetMod group at the moment, I think.
The NetMod group is actually having a good way in the library module, and I encourage you to take a look at it and to discuss which things are supported and how. So if you're deep into coding this, this is something to look at as something that might be the future. If you're not deep into coding this and you're looking at how to do operation or think through the architecture, this may be an implementation detail. Security requirements. Basically, we went through the security requirements and got an okay on everything. People did say the multiple messages was error control. And this is an interesting point. The security folks said they didn't say automatically you're using an insecure protocol to pass data. No way, stop now. They said if it's model driven and it's specific and we can sort of check that particular use case, we're okay with it. But we need to look at the specifics, and you need to put it inside of the environment, hence our need for the environment document that Joel and Daniel and I had co-authored. Okay. I'm just showing there that we have secure protocols in NetConf and RESTConf. Go ahead. Go ahead, we'll just skip that. That's not necessary. PubSub has come into NetConf, and R2S should support the user subscription. We've just had in the middle of a debate on how some of that works. So watch for more of that on the list. And the real-time notification of route installation removal should come within 1 to 5 seconds overall from start to finish. Okay, go ahead. And there's the picture of the configure what, get data back on specifically on a poll, but you may get a whole analytic stream. Okay. And I think the rest of this are specifics that I will pick up in the NetMod NetConf group. Go ahead. Okay. Next one. So that's it. I'm just a little bit behind schedule, so I skipped. Is there any questions on the requirements? What I didn't want to cut out was any questions or discussions on our sort of deep dive. We started with the chairs as sort of a big over picture. and some stuff. This deep dive into our requirements that we're handing off for the ephemeral state to NetConf is a bit of a deep dive unless you're a NetConf implementer or a NetConf specker. Okay, wonderful. Anybody ready to see the updates for the topology models? I believe, Mark, you should be someplace in the room. Yep. Are you good? You're up next. Oh, I'm sorry. You can probably share the stoplight. Is Nitin here? I'm not seeing Nitin. I guess I get to be pseudo Nitin. I'll put on a Nitin hat. Come on up. We're going to do the next one. Give me one moment.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, my name is Mark Chen. I'm going to give a quick update to this rate data model. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Okay, here are some updates to this NetConf structure. All these updates are based on the comments from Jeffrey Zhang. Also, thanks, Jeffrey. And the first update is to add a sharing flag to the NetConf structure. That is used to indicate whether a NetConf can be shared with multiple routes. This is very useful for the I2RS client to implement more flexible NetConf policies. Second update is to adjust the NetConf structure according to the update made to the information model. That is that in the previous versions, all the basic NetConf, for example, interface, IP address, are put it under the NetConf chain subtree. And the NetConf subchain is put under the NetConf base subtree. So for such a basic NetConf, it maybe have a two-level structure. So it's not natural. So we change that structure to simplify this NetConf structure. Next slide. So another update made to this version is that we changed the way to implement the capability negotiation. In the last version, we use a container to list what the features what features are rather supported. In this version, we use the feature and e-feature statement to implement this. This is a more elegant way to support this capability negotiation. Next slide. So another big change made to this version is that we add the following RPC operations to Ruby model. First is the rape, add, and delete operations. That is designed to add and delete a rape to or from a routing instance. The other one is the route add, route update, and route delete operations. That is used to add or delete or update a route of a rape. So the third group of operations is NetConf generic operations. That is NetConf add and NetConf delete operations. That is used to add NetConf or delete NetConf from a rape. Next slide. So in this version, we also made a lot of editorial changes to make it pass through the young validated truth check. Next slide. So for the next step, we will submit version 3 to address the MPS tunnel in cap issue. Its draft is ready, and we also hope that the there will be more review about the draft, and we will redress the comments when we received. And currently, the author believe that the current the upcoming version is almost ready for working group. That's call. No question.
My question is about the relationship with the routing data model that has been in the development in the NetMod working group for some years now. And this data model also defines its version of RIP actually in state data. So do you have an idea what the relationship is supposed to be? And in particular, would it make sense to augment that data model with new types of next hops, for example, that you define here?
Let me pick that one up. So Lada, I got here early, so I had a lot of fun time to look at that question. And my answer is we need to chat with you. There are some pros and there's some cons. I actually went through and saw what happened if you augmented some pieces versus what we have. It's a little bit different at all the next tops and all the tunnels. We just need to talk to you and figure out what next. Okay?
Okay. But in any case, I think that it's important that the changes imposed by I2RS are visible in state data. And for the operators, that's really crucial. So I can see no way other than somehow have this data in the state data.
That was actually one of my motivating points about we do not necessarily have to own the operational state in some cases. So we know that we have places in the data model in I2RS that do not have good overlap today. So I think the interesting exercise now that the data model is stable in terms of the feature set that we would like to have in there, we can now look at, are there components that we could refactor? Where this becomes interesting is, I think, a couple of major parts. The first one being that the next hop types are very different. So can we figure out a way to allow for the configured next hops to be put into the netmod config module, which are a little simpler, a little less tailored to various types of cases. I think the multi-instancing behavior is a slightly different. I'm a little bit behind on the model, but multi-instancing I think is slightly different between the two models, and that's something we will have to reconcile. And the third thing is, I think, an open question for your model as to what you want to do about allowing ribs to be controlled and instantiated. The RPC that was added to add and delete rib models, add and delete ribs, I think is a fundamental behavior, but I think it's one that you had chosen a few revisions ago to try to avoid talking about because you didn't want to go there yet.
Okay.
And also we have to go back to the previous ephemeral state can't be under config state, so we've got to be very careful about the model, and so we need to talk about it.
Right.
If we have some parts that meld into your model and some parts that are a standalone model, that, when I've talked to Lee and other things, that's okay. We just need a long discussion this week. So Mark and I would love to have a beer session, as Bert says.
Okay, thank you. Looking forward to that.
Hi, Dan Bogdanovic. Do you plan to add support for Ethernet topologies into your RIB, like for Trill or PBB?
Okay, yeah.
Well, so I guess the question is, are you looking to add and delete L2 entries, or are you looking for L2 visibility?
Both.
Okay, so we have L2 visibility via the topology model from a read basis. There's debate that we want to do write basis, and we've been sort of told by T's we should be careful about not stepping onto that work too early, because they have to figure out what they're going to do as well. There's also the model, I think, that L2 topology writing is currently out of charter.
But if you're talking about L2 interfaces, there's already L2 interfaces in there. So we I think I may need to go and chat with Aaliyah about that question as well. Mark, did you have any other thoughts? Because That was Jeff's and my thoughts because we were ready for that question.
Yes, in the draft, during current the rate rendered information. So there actually there's a interface rate, and there and maybe rendered to your, for example, the Ethernet, right? Topology. Maybe you can discuss offline about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Do you want to do Nitin's slide?
Mark? No, okay. That's fine.
Okay. Nitin thought he would be here, so I'm going to do this. I'm virtual Nitin.
You're not tall enough.
I'm not tall enough. Yes, you have to sort of squish me. This having 2 pointers is so cool. Okay, so the simplified, what they did is they decided that it was time to sort of close the info model. So they're sort of tailoring it off as this is what they thought, because for a long time we were only doing the info model, and then we're going to go on with the data model. So this has gone to working group last call, it's passed, and Nitin is describing what happened in that last call. I will then send it forward to the ISG with the requirements and the other thing to show where we are in the direction and to provide details for people to give us feedback. So he fixed the next hop grammar, he added grammar rules, and he fixed editorials. Pretty what you do at last call for info models. We have not, in case it comes up, there is a new working group in ops looking at info models. This started long before then, and we're not going to wait for that to forward this to the ISG. Okay, topology. Do I have the right one?
Yes.
Oh.
This is the right one.
You want the pointers?
Maybe just one would be enough.
One's enough.
Thank you.
No good.
Okay, so yeah, so this is the update to the network topology models, to the network topology models, the general model, and the layer 3, but actually most concerns just the general, which has been also in that call. Next slide. So basically, there were a couple of updates, or basically a couple of items, and basically 2 topics I think that we need to discuss here as a thought that were raised also in discussions on the. Can you hear me? Yes. So maybe a little bit better. Okay, so first of all, there were a couple of nits actually that were received. Some smaller comments from Jürgen. Actually, also some smaller comment from Jan and so on and so forth. Those are basically all accepted, non-controversial and so forth. The main open topic, if you will, or topic that came up was basically how we deal with configurable topology versus read-only topology. And basically, as you recall, basically in the topology model, we do allow topologies to be layered, which basically means that you can define an overlay on top of an underlay. And basically, as part of the model, you can specify for a given node, for a given link, and so forth, what are the supporting nodes, what are the supporting links, and so forth beneath it. And we are leveraging also Yang to express integrity rules that, for instance, state that basically if you the supporting nodes, supporting links, and support need to be part of the supporting topology, those sorts of things. So that's basically the layering aspect. Now, basically, the issue comes with the fact that some topologies can be server provided. Basically, the idea is basically they can be discovered from the network. They basically come into being, if you will, basically by discovery. They're basically populated by the servers themselves. Whereas other topologies, specifically overlay topologies, would be configured or subject to configuration by a client application, basically on top of that. And so the current solution of this is that we have basically one model which basically expresses all topology information as as configuration information. And in this, we have an object, a leaf object, that indicates basically the source of the network topology, basically whether the object was populated basically by the server itself or by the network or by a client application. And then basically based on that, the implication is that that basically the server arbitrary client should not basically generally be allowed to change the topology that is populated by the network itself. So for advance. Okay, so this is again just kind of like as a reminder. This is basically the high-level overview, basically of the model structure, and you see basically the contentious object basically is right here. So we have basically the server-provided object, and actually, incidentally, this object is also read-only, and actually this is what actually triggered that first discussion, because it looks a little bit odd in terms of basically that basically everything is configuration. So why is that one read-only? So, is it coming? Sorry. Okay. Essentially, the issue was so basically there are a couple of issues that were raised. So the first issue, or basically the main issue, was basically whether, well, first basically that we should separate the configuration true and configuration false information, which basically means that the server provided object could basically move into a separate, can either be move into a separate tree to indicate the state, or you can basically make it also configurable. So that's one thing, but this is actually just the minor issue, if you will. The main aspect is basically what happens. This triggered basically the bigger discussion as to what happens with the overlay in the wake of underlay changes, and also how to. Yeah, and basically how to deal with this server provided semantics. And basically the discussion that came up is basically, is server provided, should this be treated as state-based information, and should therefore basically be split the model, having basically a state branch and a config branch, and basically deal with that that way. However, basically there are a number of issues actually with this. Namely, well, starting with the fact that basically the aspect of how you express the layering between the overlay and the underlay becomes no longer really well supportable in Yang, because one thing is basically there's a requirement that you have that configuration nodes, leaf reps, and that we have a lot of leaf reps actually in this model. If you can go back a moment to the data model, so you see actually a lot of the model is actually maintained through these leaf refs, which basically link the overlay and the underlay, and basically you could not utilize it. Yang does not allow you to use leaf refs to for instance refer from configuration information to state information. So that is one. So that is one of the issues. Can you move forward? Yeah. Okay. So that's so basically for this there are now basically 4 alternatives, I guess, that have been suggested. The first, alternative is basically that we basically leave the model as it is, and the implementation of that model and so forth. Basically it means that we have basically topology data is fundamentally configuration data, which can be populated, conceptually can be populated by apps that are either residing on the client or on the server. And we have basically this special annotation of what the server provided semantics means. So that's one alternative. Second alternative is to split the model, basically to deal with the operational and network configuration base. And I have a slide on this. The implication of this is basically this would mean that we will lose basically a lot of the leaf reps, but basically this will be replaced essentially by having effectively strings, and basically the problem is punted to the application of automating this. I mean, a little bit simplified, but I think roughly this is what it boils down to. Third suggestion that was raised, well, maybe you take the opposite stance. Don't support configuration of topology altogether. Just make it all read-only, and basically leave the configuration of topology for another day. And then the fourth suggestion is basically a modification of the first suggestion. It means basically leave it as is, but add a metadata annotation. So there's this metadata draft currently that would essentially allow us to basically introduce a metadata, a metadata item that basically indicates that certain configuration is server provided with this notation. I think actually that, yeah. Okay, so going forward. So basically, this basically discusses the different options. So first thing, basically, we treat all topology as regular configuration. Basically, this means, yeah, servers can have this embedded application that populates the topology. If we treat it just as regular configuration, it would, of course, however, imply that we don't differentiate between who populated this application, which does mean that if you have a malicious agent, or sorry, if you have a malicious client, it could go ahead and basically try to reconfigure a server-provided topology, or basically a topology that is really basically maintained by another app, and basically in the worst case, basically try to lock out basically that application from performing an application there. So that's basically the main issue and so forth with this one. Then basically one extension for this is to add the metadata, where basically, which would basically mean that we tag the server provided data as such, which basically means that if you have configuration and locking attempts to this configuration data by other clients that are not populated by the server, should basically be declined. So this would be basically the solution for that. I think actually Kent here, actually Kent I think made that suggestion. So all right, so that was one. Going forward, can you please advance? I don't think the advance button here works. It's just a pointer. So, okay. So the second suggestion was to split the model into the network state and network configuration. This, of course, has a little bit bigger ramifications in terms of basically changes to the model. Basically would mean that we have two branches of the model. They utilize the same groupings on both sides, but basically we have a state-based, we have state, and then we have topologies that can be configuration, are represented as configuration. The issues there are, of course, that, as mentioned, configuration data cannot refer operational data. One possible solution is that we replace leaf refs with some other data type, which basically means that we simply reference data by name, not by leaf ref, not by a Yang construct, and we basically leave it up to applications to deal with that, with this issue. Also, as a result, it basically means also that certain integrity rules of the model can no longer really be supported just by the Yang itself. So there are basically additional validation checks and so forth that need to be made by application. And then another item, and this is just kind of like as an FYI, of course, by having two branches, it means that the augmentation of the model becomes somewhat more complex, because now there are two branches of the model, the config version of the model and the state model branch basically of the model that will need to be augmented by the basically by the dependent topology configurations. Okay, so. Another item also just to mention, this was actually one of the items that was actually on the first slide. There was also another problem that was, or basically another question that was brought up, concerned basically how we deal if you have an overlay configured over an underlay and the underlay changes. Basically it's the question in cases where this would invalidate the overlay, how to essentially deal with that issue. But I think this is almost kind of like a separate item. I think actually I had it on somewhere different on one of the other slides. Sorry, please move on. Okay, so then finally is again, well, okay, we leave the current solution basically in place with the semantic of the server provided topology. As mentioned, well, right now, basically I mean, I think basically there's no perfect solution, but basically with the issues that were discussed here, basically the main implication is that we would have to accept to not treat topology information, which is configuration information, as configuration information like any other, simply basically because there is the semantics that is associated with this as expressed by this object, which would basically say don't make it just a regular piece of configuration. And I think this is. I think this is it. So
I do have a few comments. Let me, just as a reminder for the working group, this is from the charter, the ability to extract information about topology from the network is one of the chartered items. Injection and creation will not be considered as work item. That said, the reason why we're sort of looking at this is because it was discovered pretty early on that this was a likely base model for other work to happen in IETF. So, we are allowing the work to be listed as configurable type items. I think there's a huge amount of open question in terms of what that actually means. So, the topology model is a very abstract rendering from whatever is contributing to topology. That could be BGP-LS, it could be the IGPs, it could be static configuration. From a writing standpoint, it opens sort of two, I think, three interesting questions. The first one is, now that we're to the point where we have some better idea about what ephemeral configuration will look like at some point in the future, where does that belong in this model for write purposes? Do you want to temporarily override something like to increase a link metric as an example? A second open question is, when you make such a change, is the understanding that this only impacts things that would be readers of this data, and it doesn't impact the underlying distribution mechanism? So if I upcost a link of some sort, the expectation is that it does not impact, like OSPF, if OSPF is the generator of that. So I don't think we have answers for these right now. I was wondering if you had any thoughts early on.
Can you re-articulate the last part of the question? I'm not quite sure what to
so the point is, for example, if a piece of the topology is a given link between two routers was discovered and put into the TE model because it came from OSPF, if you do a write to that model, perhaps an ephemeral write, that's something we still have to figure out, and you increase the cost of the link, do you expect that OSPF is going to pick that up in some fashion, or is this only for the consumers of the Yang model? So you're basically overriding the view. You're not actually telling the topology itself. You're not telling OSPF to change its behavior.
So I'm not entirely sure how to respond to this. Maybe regarding TE, I see Springs here. Maybe I can punt that part of the question to him.
That's fine.
But I would think, basically, in general, we would want, of course, when you say basically just for the reader, for the consumer of the Yang model, I do think actually the purpose of this is Yang is just a means to an end.
Yes.
We just want to reflect the real world and so forth, and have an abstraction of that, and Yang is just a vehicle to do that. So with that in mind, I would actually think that we need to be able to represent what we have in the real world, and so it could not be completely independent of how the real world actually behaves.
I think a way to restate my thought is, what does write to this model actually mean? If this is meant to be a operational view of the real world, why would you be able to configure into it?
Okay, so for the server provider, you would not want to do that. You want it to reflect exactly the real world. I think the issue comes only basically when you have some overlay that is basically owned by a client application. This is basically where that issue comes in.
Yes,
only there.
You're having the problem when the application reads the world and adds a link. Are you adding it only to the combined topology, or the
So I think actually for this one we would have the separation in general very clear, because the authoritative owner of the server provided stuff is basically the real world. So we're not changing that through an application. Now the only thing that the application does is it builds some other stuff on top of that. Now you could say, now so this is basically the other problem basically regarding what do we do when the real world changes, right? So in that case, okay, basically what the application built on top of that may be invalidated. So clearly, basically, that is something that the application will need to deal with, but that is basically ultimately a problem basically actually of that application. So the real world, the real world is a real world. And the one thing that we might indicate, and this is actually was, for instance, should in those cases we give a hint perhaps that they configured by this overlay thing, the thing that you built on the real world actually the real world change, and actually you have actually one piece basically that does not, that has been invalidated by this. So you may want to configure, you may want to reconsider how you basically map your overlay to the underlay.
Right, and the reason Jeff and I are asking you these questions is because we want to point out that the rights are not to the real world, which would be against charter, but rights to this generated topology. Okay.
Right, so it's basically, we need to, it's not specifically in charter for us to do so now. It's maybe more in TEAS charter. We know we need to support them, but illustrating specifically how these higher order rights relate to the models, I think probably could use a little clarification. Martin.
Okay, Martin Björklund. So maybe I missed this, and maybe this later discussion actually provided an answer. So did you have, so you presented these different solution proposals. Did you have one of them in mind as the preferred solution?
Yeah, the preferred solution would, well, okay, so I think the preferred solution is the one where we have, is essentially the current solution, potentially annotated with the metadata. I think actually the metadata, I think that is actually I think that is a good suggestion, but basically to not split them all accordingly. So of these things, yeah, basically this one, yeah.
So how do you want to treat the problem of the referential integrity in that case? I mean, the problem of if you have the server provided topologies, and then regardless of Yang constructs, if you have references down to the server provided topology from something that the user configured, how do you handle that problem? I mean, you will have the same problem regardless of the solution.
Yeah,
right?
the problem, okay, the problem basically is that if the underlay changes and you have an overlay thing, that actually exists basically regardless of solution,
Right.
actually precisely. So I think there's no, the question is basically who would need to deal with that problem, and I think who would need to deal with that problem is actually the application that configured the overlay, right? Because that's where the overlay essentially lives. And so from the model, I would think basically there are two things. One thing is basically when you first create the overlay, Yang provides all the constructs about to make sure that the integrity is there. But of course later and so forth, if certain things change, how would you basically invalidate that? And so for that one, well, I guess there are for this there are multiple possibilities again. So one thing is basically, okay, you leave it basically up to the application to validate that. We could basically see, is there something that we should do in the framework to say if the underlay, well, it's the same thing, actually the same problem as in general when we have a leaf ref, right? A leaf ref to another object, and the object that you're referencing has a change. How do we deal with it from the leaf ref? How do we invalidate that? And I think this is actually that very same issue. And I would think basically you could say, okay, basically you don't do anything. In this case, you have basically you could have certain violations of referential integrity that come into being later on. That's option one. Option two is that you say that actually you automatically basically invalidate or basically remove any configurations that were in conflict. And option three is that we introduce some additional state or so that basically indicates basically whether the references are valid or basically that indicate basically when something is broken. And maybe you have other suggestions.
Well, so this problem of referential integrity was the reason for not doing the other solutions, right? But then in this solution, you also have the same problem. So anyways, in Yang 101, there is actually a new statement. I mentioned that on the list. So a substatement to leaf ref that says require instance false. That means that you can actually have a reference to something that doesn't exist. And then you will have to deal with this on the application layer, which sounds like what you're looking for.
It sounds like an application of
just
this.
a minute. This is a great discussion. I just want you to pull the mic up a little. Either pick it up or do something because what you're saying is important.
Okay, maybe this was better. So, and also, if you're going this way of what it says here, involves acceptance to not treat topology config as config like any other, then I suggest that you do not, use the Yang current statements and in description text change the semantics of those statements. It would be better to introduce something new in that case, if this is really what you want to do.
Yeah, something new in what sense? And so then, for instance, I mean, I think first of all, actually, I think having the leaf ref extension seems very usable for here. So I think that's definitely well. The other thing, basically, to introduce something new, presumably, what's the way to do that? Metadata seems to be a good solution. What do you think of that one?
No, because metadata is just a property of the instance, right? And you're changing the way the configuration works.
Sure.
And so if you really want to go that way, I think you should think that through and not reuse, the current Yang.
Not reuse it, but okay, but if we don't reuse it, I mean, this is always what's the alternative, right? So one alternative is that you say, okay, we don't reuse it, we just make a string, it has a name, and we say, and then we add a long description statement, and it basically looks like what we did in MIPS
well,
in the past.
it's not the referential integrity problem. This is more like the config true, right? Because you're saying that it's modeled as config true, but clients cannot modify some of them. I mean, we're essentially changing the semantics of what config true means. So, you're treating some of the configuration instances as not really part of configuration. It's something else, but it's still modeled as config true.
Okay.
We can continue this discussion.
I think you guys need to sit together afterwards, because I think you're making some really good points, and maybe there's some way you can think a way out of our box. We really need a solution for this. So maybe Alexander, and I'm sorry I missed your name.
Martin.
Pardon? Martin. Oh, wonderful. Now I recognize you. Wonderful. I'm sorry, Martin. Maybe
Right, so
Martin and Alexander, you can sit together. Would that be okay, Martin?
Sure.
Because I think we really need your help to think through things.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Alberto. This is a bit too high for me. Could it be that part of the problem is because the guy who owns the overlay and the underlay, they are different, and the guy who's managing actually the mapping is the overlay owner? Would it be an option that that mapping will be owned by the underlay guy, by the underlay owner? Because if something changes there, thinking that the overlay just cares about having an overlay, how that is realized, is it an option that that's owned by the underlay owner, and if something changed underneath, all the leaf refs will be updated, point to a different mapping? Is that an option?
I'm not sure. I think basically the underlay owner cannot make a decision on how the overlay owner should react. But I think that the one thing that the underlay owner could potentially do is it could basically be aware, if you will, that there are overlays, that basically that there are references that are pointing to it, and essentially basically indicate then some kind of notification or some basically that there are some changes that have been occurring. I would think so. I think it could provide an indication of that there are changes in the underlay, potentially changes that may affect an overlay. But I think the problem of how to do the mapping, how to update that is ultimately something that is ultimately not the problem that the underlay can solve, but it is up to the overlay owner.
Right.
I think.
Again, I'm going to recommend that, after this meeting, you guys sit in the hallway and talk a little bit and see if we can come to a solution. Martin, we really do need something that fixes this or determine that we can't fix it. So I'd appreciate your help. And I'm sorry I didn't catch the other name. So do you know that one? Okay, I think we're good on that one. Okay, good. Back to the short person. This is the last part of our protocol independent work. We had the RIB, we had the topology model, which we need some help with, and we have the filter-based RIB. Filter-based RIB I'm going to define because the real issue is that people don't always we agreed on the definition of filter-based rib with ALIA and the ISG, so it may or may not be the terminology that you're used to in the industry. Just pause there. The agent that is doing a filter-based rib only operates on certain interfaces. You specify the interface that you're operating on. Second, you have an ordered list of event condition actions, match on IP header, destination address 192.168.12, and then forward is one event condition action or an ACL. Okay, so you have an ordered list. One match on this, two match on maybe the V4 type of service, and that creates an ordered list of filters. So as a packet comes in on the wire on one of these interfaces, you go through one of the event condition order lists, determine what to do, and that's what a filter-based lib is. If none of the lists, if none of the filters match, then you have a default rib that helps you forward it. If in the default rib you don't have any route, it gets dropped. This is a definition of filter-based rib. Okay. Some people call something like this policy routing, not BGP routing policy, but policy forwarding routing. But we're going to use filter-based rib here. Okay. So that's been the definition of filter-based rib since we added it last March timeframe. Let me show you a revision to the filter-based rib, which hopefully is simplistic, is a clearer model with less complexity and more focus. Okay, we have here a list, a linked list of filter-based ribs, all identified by their name, also having inside of the ribs their address family, V4, V6, for packets flowing in and operating on some interfaces. We will come back to this. We also have a place where we tag which interface is using it and create the list of ribs. So if you look at the group of policy, you have a name for the policy, an ordered number, an identity ref that indicates whether it's ACL or ESA, and then you point to either access lists or you point to an event condition action. This document references a general event condition action info model and data model. Okay, so what are the issues we ran into since the last time? First of all, we clarified the model. We sort of cleaned up things based on great suggestions from the working group. We created, we know that filter-based ribs create active filtering at a model, but they may apply to an instance, i.e. an instance that associates with certain rib, or they actually, Linda gave us an example for security devices. They may apply across multiple instances. There may be an instance routing that's running over here that's controlling a set of interfaces, another that's controlling another set. And only within those sets A and B do you want some of them to be considered. So that filter could be global. So I went to look in the, and this is for my Mahesh or Mehmet, I went to look for filter-based ribs in the netconf netmod. You know, don't invent if you can use something from our colleagues in netmod, netmod or netconf. There isn't anything. Martin, if you know of something, leap up and I won't have to, I'll do less work. Therefore, when I looked at this, I realized it was a more generic function. And so one of the things I need help with is I created the Yang structures so that the Yang structures would be able to be linked in at a global level, just like ACLs, because essentially ECA policy and filter-based ribs are a super ACL and also put underneath an instance. And we need to have some discussions with the NetMod and NetConf, whichever group is doing it, and IR2S. Well, where should this really go in the end? It's not really a rib. It looks like an ACL. It looks like a rib. It's something in between. We really need to stick it in the right place in the structure. Linda made a very good point based on her work in her I2NSF group, which is doing security work using I2RS-like protocol and Yang models, that they have to work across multiple instances in virtual security devices. So since that's something we need to do within the IETF, I want to make sure we get some feedback. That is the issue that we have. And we need a solution, I think, that comes to both ephemeral and non-ephemeral. But we need discussion at this IETF from knowledgeable people and operational people who might know, gee, if you had policy routing today, do you apply it just in one instance, or do you have templates or things that you work across? So looking for all sorts of input, and would take it. You could suggest it to Russ, who's working on this, or Jeff, you want to, or Linda. We're all working on this, trying to help work on this. And Ignatius, so over here. So I hope to get a draft today, but I wanted to see if I'm really off base, in which case I won't put out the draft. We'll just leave the old one, which didn't point this out. Okay, that's this one. Questions on the filter-based rib? Okay. Okay, just a minute. And you want to get closer to a mic for this one? Or you can hide underneath the chair too. Okay, so first of all, we had, after last IETF 93, we engaged with the NetConf team, and Andy and Kent had been helping us, excuse me, the NetConf, NetMod groups of experts about how to actually start working toward a protocol for I2S. What sort of enhancements do we need for the ephemeral configuration? This is the config channel. We may, as I mentioned at the front, send some data via another set of channels, maybe IPFix or something else. That is model dependent. So right now we're focusing in this thing on the configuration and ephemeral piece that would be working for NetConf. So Andy and Kent went down to a very simple thing. Here we have our current data stores, candidate, running, startup, and we have operational data. That's the simple picture of what happens in config land right now. You have config true above the line and config false below. Now, if you look at the new terminology being used in some circles, Jeff's laughing. You have intended config being the summary of that and applied. Because that terminology was changing, we're not going to use that for the rest of this. Okay, we're going to have a simple model that Andy had to think about your home temperature. Okay, and this made a lot of sense to me because right now I've got a couple of my daughters home from college in between semesters, and they turn up the heat and I turn down the heat. So I want a set temperature for the heat. So this simple model is about thermostats. Okay, what degree temperature you configure, what degree temperature you might, and then think of me as a parent with college-age students saying, I want to hold this temperature. You just configure the temperature, but right now I want to hold it. And so we're not letting our girls change the configuration. We're just letting them hold the temperature if they feel too cold. So you have a desired temperature that might go to this config that you intend to drop to the actual thermometer, and you have a client like I have inside of my home smart temperature. I have a scheduler client that changes configuration and monitors temperature. Okay, so the scheduler client takes my configuration and monitors it. This hold temperature button that I'm trying to do because my girls play with the temperature would write an ephemeral temperature in there, and that ephemeral would, as we said with the panes of glass, take precedence over the desired temperature, and I would apply that configuration to my thermometer. Okay, so that all sounds really simple. How would I express it, Jeff? Let me get to the end of the slide. No, you can stand up there. I'm just telling you, let me get to the end. The RESTConf, you put a running data store for the configuration. For the ephemeral, you just tag the data store ephemeral. Now you can ask a question. You should state.
Justin Sir Erickson. So if your heating system is broken, you'll never get to the intended temperature, right?
Pardon?
If your system is broken, you might push whatever you want, you'll never get there.
Yes, that's true.
So after you have configured, would be great to get some feedback. Actually, I've taken your intended configuration. I'm working towards this temperature.
That's right. That's how we get the operational state. Good example. The operational state gets the actual.
But it's missing.
Oh, the line's missing? Oh, sorry. You are correct.
Russ White Erickson. I'm a little bit confused, I think, perhaps. But I don't understand how this is actually different than just having multiple controllers that set priorities and having the callback if their priority is overwritten. It seems to me like this is very much the same thing, except that you're trying to say one controller gets to be the parent controller. But now wait, if I have two parent controllers, if I have mom and dad arguing, they have to have a priority. So I'm right back where I started with priorities and overrides.
This works with priority overrides. You're absolutely right. Mom and dad, if mom and dad
And
fight, who's
don't
the
step
priority?
out of that pink square.
Okay, we're going to go to the next point. Again, the only thing that needs to change inside the thermostat model is to allow the need for desired temperature to have an ephemeral copy. Okay, now I get to step out to get the next thing. Okay.
Also, was changing slides. Did you want to add anything, Kent? Something we might have missed?
Do you want me to go back to the other one?
No.
Okay.
Kent. So when I think about this, the interaction, the actual protocol, what the client is trying to express seems clear. I mean, in RESTConf terms, on the wire, the message that would be sent from the client to the server is clear. The only thing we're discussing, I think, is what does the server do with that message?
That's correct.
The meta model, right?
Yes.
So from a protocol perspective, we could actually declare done, I think. Maybe. We're close.
We're close.
Yeah, I think the question is, you know, for ephemeral type stuff, we expect the behavior to be just slightly different. But in terms of what we can encode on the wire, I think you're right.
Right.
When we are addressing a node that is ephemeral only, you know, if it's disjoint in the configuration sense, you can configure the mom temperature versus the config temperature, perfectly fine. You don't require anything special in there. The difference is today, netconf expects that the mom temperature is going to persist across reboots.
Right.
Right. So that was the beauty of what you guys came up with,
Yeah.
is the protocol is pretty much there, which is handy.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to give a routing example next. Please go ahead and ask questions.
Hi, Jason Stern. A couple questions. I noticed you used the example of encoding using RESTconf. Has there been convergence on only supporting that, or are you guys also going to do netconf encoding for the same stuff? Or
so the general idea thus far is that RESTconf is probably a little bit better suited for the initial work, just simply because it has a lot of the nice properties that we care for, like atomicity, no candidate data store, no confusion about what constraints look like in terms of crossing data stores. So all those sorts of things I think are convenient properties for I2RS. But we also understand that anything that we do probably has carryover into netconf as well, because while I2RS has things like priority and other behaviors that I think may be I2RS specific, the idea of ephemeral data stores or ephemeral behavior is probably something that's IETF wide. So it's more a matter of, RESTconf makes it a little bit easier to say, well, here's a really quick way to get there. The question then becomes, what does the same thing look like in netconf if we can do it? And that's where we're leaving it to the netconf experts to come up with.
Okay, so you're not seeing it, just netconf is generally like kind of a superset. So you're not seeing it as an easy, I mean, if it's supported in RESTconf, you're not necessarily seeing it as an easy, it's not easy to also just get in netconf. I'm probably behind on some discussions around this,
That's
so I
okay.
apologize, but.
Kent, I'm going to ask you if you want to answer this rather than let me struggle. Thank you.
So I guess there's no reason why we couldn't do it in netconf, but to date, we've been thinking RESTconf only, and that's been liberating in the sense that we don't have to deal with the legacy data stores and other locking type mechanisms that netconf has. So if there's a solution that's RESTconf only, I think we'll go for it.
If it's just because it's there. If netconf wants to enhance things to support that, as far as I understood from Andy, that was good.
I guess with RESTconf, like there's no session concept, right? So how do you associate priority and that sort of thing?
So priority would have to be predefined. The client is authorized, and when they authenticate, there'd be a priority associated.
There's only one priority per client,
Yeah.
so you can't associate it that way. Did you want to enter into this? Just please go ahead.
I had another kind of related question.
Sure, great.
Earlier I'd asked.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name.
Sorry, Jason Stern.
Jason, thank you.
Earlier I had a question about, you guys were talking about multiple ephemeral priorities, and we clarified there's not multiple copies of ephemeral for a leaf. But I think there might be two copies of a leaf, one for ephemeral and one for config.
That is
That's what we are
correct.
saying. Okay, so not multiple copies for ephemeral, but we will have two copies on the device.
Yes.
Because when you remove the ephemeral, presumably you again reinstantiate the config value, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And
you've got it. I
okay,
think,
so
by
two
George.
copies, but not multiple ephemerals.
well, we're not completely excluding the idea of multiple ephemerals, but what we're trying to do for this first pass is, let's say, what can we do with a single idea of ephemeral? Like one of the things that has actually come through the design discussions is that clients having priority is a little bit painful because it has implications about how they collide within a given pane of glass. If clients were forced to instantiate as an entire pane of glass, that removes a lot of the ambiguities. But we are also aware that the more layers you end up adding to the resolution to figure out what the active config is through the panes of glass, the more complicated things become in terms of implementation. So we're sort of pushing towards the single pane of glass for ephemeral, but nothing is stopping us from it potentially going there. And it may even be an implementation detail at some point, may say that I2RS is only mandating the single pane for ephemeral, and if other implementations decide to do this for non-I2RS purposes, that's your own problem to get into.
So now, what you said, future, we'll figure it out. Yep. And again, sorry, I don't know you're next.
Hi, I'm Max from KK, and I returning to the previous slides about configuration steps, I'm just wonder if maybe I missed something, but I just wonder if some validation step should take place, because let's say you prepare some configuration, yes, and during the preparation process you make some kind of capability checks, yeah.
Yes.
And then you keep it for a while, yes.
Mhm.
I don't know how long you can keep it, yes, but and then you decide to apply this configuration, but situation actually, I mean, capability situation changed. So the configuration you have prepared, it's not valid anymore.
Okay.
That's
So early in the discussion, we noted that it would be good for some configurations to do referential check, which is what you're talking about, whether the capability is there. We've also noted that the library function inside of,
The library module.
the library module from netconf and netmod has that capability at a module level that you're passing back. That says in general, if the module no longer even has the capability, that module library would tell you.
Yeah, the general behavior that we're expecting, we're not expecting that ephemeral behavior will be a feature that enables and disables. You're either going to have it or not. So the capability will not change for ephemeral over the lifetime of the device.
Your
but I2RS does say that the ephemeral database may potentially go away because it's crashed or something like that.
We are not answering your question by your look. Please ask again.
Yeah.
Please ask it in another way.
okay. I need to think. We can maybe take it offline.
Okay, or catch us afterwards. It just looks like we're not understanding something, and I apologize that we're not making that. Okay. Okay. You're on the line. Let me get it. It may become clearer as I give a rib example rather than just the thermometer. We hope the thermometer was simple. Okay, this is a very simple case. You have 128.2/16 with next hop 1. Pick your number that you want for your next hop, but just we'll call it 1 for right now for simplicity. 128.2/16 with next hop 2 is added by the R2S RIP. The denial of service is what causes the R2S RIP to be written. Okay. So again, same model. Now I'm going to go through the R2S model and sort of characterize it. We have config, we have operational data, and we have extensions. I'm focusing on the config and not on the operational data. You have a route, you have a route index, you have a match for it, and you have next hops. Okay. So here's what we have. We have in the initial configuration install, you have 192.168.16 with the next hop ID of 1. We'll just call it that for right now. And you drop 192.1.1.1 into an intended config. It gets installed, and someplace in your node in most Linux systems, you will find and install active and which interface. That is the operational data. You have a scheduler client who's looking for this route to appear. So it scheduled in a configuration, it's looking to have this route appear. Now, someplace in the network, you have an IDS IPS system, and it discovers that that next hop has been trashed for some reason. Somebody has gotten into it and made it unsafe. So this IPS says, I'm going to put in 198.2-16 with next hop 2. For simplicity, call that 192.1.1.2. You then install it, and in the operational data, you will find that it will be installed now as active, and some nodes might leave in the route. Some nodes may toss out the old route, but if they left it in, it would be installed non-active and interface 1. So what would the simple protocol language look like? Again, just like the first case, you have put via RESTconf, here's the route, here's the next hop, we'll call it 1 for right now. And in the second case, you have the data store ephemeral, next hop 2. Done. Okay. And what you would need is at the top of the rib, ephemeral true. Okay. So that is the end of that tree. If you had a netconf data store get, it might look like this, with a get config and an ephemeral data store. We need a priority feature for a netconf for the merge and replace. I think Kent already mentioned that. And the default operation would be merge for priority and replace for priority. The error option is we only have all or nothing. And we're still in formation on how all this detail work, but we wanted to tell you sort of what we're thinking. Questions on this one? Should be, hope, the fact that you're basically all looking, yeah, this is simple, makes me very happy. Other netconf changes, there's no support for lock or unlock. There is no support for confirm to commit. Notice the requirements, push that. And the other thing we need to have someplace, and it may not be netconf, is we need a session association, because what we've said is there may be multiple transports associated with one client agent. Do you want a question?
Yeah.
Is it on this one or
On this one,
on the support?
on lock, because you mentioned that the ephemeral should be never locked, and here you're saying lock unlock.
No, no support for it. No support for lock or unlock. You can't do it. Did I do something?
There's no support, but the question becomes, what does that actually mean? It was like one of the reasons we're talking about RESTconf is there's no locking that's required.
Yeah.
It's just part of transaction. But when we have the conversation again of what does this look like under netconf, that's an implication.
Okay.
This is not under RESTconf. This is under netconf. Okay. I'm unearthing issues that took us down the RESTconf first pass. If we want to solve this for netconf, these are some of the issues that have to be solved. I'll stop with that. And then we have a session I2S client agent association. In RESTconf, you have an atomic set of stuff between a client and an agent. It might need the session association where you know that there are multiple sessions, but there's not the type of netconf things. And expanded commands, I think I've gone through. With single route installs to do the referential checking, who asked about, this may help the discussion. The single route installs, all the syntax on all routes should be checked. Bad me. The referential should check if they're enabled. We anticipate for most small route sets that the referential checks will be enabled. However, we were given an example by Jan Medved where he wanted to drop 100,000 routes within a quick time. You're not going to get that with all the referential checks in unless you do something special. He was asking if we could disable them. Good question.
Yes. So if you are, I'm just thinking about the data ownership. So you should not be not be allowed to overwrite any data that does not belong to you.
That's unless you're prior.
Excuse me?
Data you don't have permission.
Yeah, exactly.
No, nothing that you don't have permission.
Then you don't have permission. So and then again, if some other systems are making references to the data, and it's a question also, do they have the permission to use the data? Because if, let's say I'm the admin, I'm adding some data, I'm removing the data, but some other higher level, low level, also high level, low level, essentially, let's put this, non-admin users were referencing to the data, and the admin decides to delete the data. So he should be allowed, to essentially to delete that data because he has a
The higher priority.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. One question people asked on the list that we can either address now or put off till we actually get some implementation experience was, do we need batch reads and writes beyond put or patch? And yeah, Lada, see, I did have notice on the screen. I said we need to do alignment. So if you didn't bring it up, I was. Okay. I'm going to go through a topology. How many people want to see a topology example? I've got 11 o'clock. We've got just this discussion for the whole time period. So I can show a topology model example, but I can stop here and answer questions on the protocol beginnings. What do people think? We'd love to hear feedback on how you think this initial pass is going. The reason we're doing it this way rather than saying, we'll just give you something, please give us some initial viewpoints. Okay, are we all having the jet lag problem? Okay, that's fine. Any other questions? This is the last topic. You can have early departure.
So let's make this more explicit. Please raise your hand if you actually want to work through an example.
Oh, good. Would you like to work through the topology example? Okay.
So there is also an option. If you are not interested in the example, you could leave, go eat your lunch early. We're happy to work with people directly.
Hi, here's Gert. I have a question about the ownership of the config data, basically triggered by Dan's question. Who is basically the owner of the configuration in the server? Is it the server, or is it the client who pushed it?
Are you talking about config state or ephemeral config state?
Config state.
Config is exactly it is today. So from a netconf perspective, and this is where I suspect the chairs will throw things at me if I get this wrong, the server owns the state. The client that had authorization to put that state is the one that put it there. But as far as the server is concerned, there are no properties of that state having been added by a specific user. So for example, if user Jeff adds a static route into static config, netconf and Yang today don't maintain the fact that that static route is Jeff's static route. No, that's not a thing that we have today. You could find that out from the logs, of course, but that it is not actually a property of the database.
Well, I think I'm probably thinking about a different example. So assume the case where a certain, let's say, interface card doesn't exist. However, it gets provisioned from the client. Now, if the config state would be on the ownership of the client, can provision it without any problem because this is what he wants. But if it is owned by the server could simply reject it because theoretically the hardware doesn't exist, or the capability to config or to get ephemeral data doesn't exist. It's a normal, let's say, netconf operation. And that's the reason why I'm asking, because I would expect that the config state is actually in the ownership of the client, and the ephemeral data is something that is in the ownership of the server. So the server can do whatever is needed with the ephemeral data because he knows what it is, but the config data that comes from the client, I would suppose to be in the ownership of the client.
And that's actually been the interesting discussion specifically regarding priorities. So like I said, in terms of the static config and existing netconf today, the server just has state. In the case of I2RS, we're saying that there's this priority mechanism now in play. This means that the data store for a ephemeral config node has to have some sense of minimally what priority it was configured at. It doesn't necessarily need to know the user, although that's one way to potentially implement it. And there has been discussion back and forth of when you create this stuff in the ephemeral data store, what is internally tagged to enforce this? Does it maintain the priority? Does this maintain the user? And do you simply do a check as you're doing stuff? And that's a detail that I think is still being fully resolved. And that's when I think that actually is going to be resolved by the people who really work on the code.
So give me one more. You do perhaps recall that this is an authenticated, mutually authenticated. So whoever, if you're writing to the config, it's an authenticated, authorized person on the client who's changing things in the server. If you're doing the same thing with an IR2S enabled client, it's the same authorized. Okay, so we're in the same place. So it's that authorization set up by AAA or whoever. We haven't changed that. It's just when ephemeral gets turned on, it has the ability to overwrite a config model. That's part of the model itself that's happening. Okay, so all of this is taking place inside of that concept. And the question that you had is still germane based on that concept?
Yeah, so basically, let me try to rephrase a little bit the thing. So with adding ephemeral state to a config state, we basically have the capability, like in your temperature example, that someone, so you're setting the target of that control loop, and the control loop over time adapts to that target.
Yep.
So the target is basically your ownership. You're the client. You set the target. Okay, you provision it into your heating system, but it's still it's yours. So even if the heating system would not be able to heat up to, I don't know, 40 degrees Celsius, if you decide you want to have 40 degrees Celsius, you simply put it in. So the heating system would not reject it because you have the higher priority compared to the heating system. You could also see it in a different way. You can say, okay, the heating system only supports up to 30 degrees Celsius. So if you're trying to set 40 degrees, you get rejected. Because,
and that's the referential checks we mentioned.
And this is exactly what I'm questioning. As soon as I have an ephemeral state, which is trying, let's say, to attach it let's say, to be close to your target, that target is no more something that should reside on the server. That is your responsibility as a client to set the correct target. There should no one be on top of this client to say, no, you didn't give me the right target.
So you're saying that in the data model, which is what is shared, you do not want referential checks that are occurring in the data model that are tested and enforced by the server? Because the data model is in the server, right? And it's got the syntactical checks and it's got the referential checks. Are you suggesting that the client, you want to remove those referential checks?
No, I mean, there's certainly a good reason to do a referential check, for example, syntax purposes, right? I mean, you can always get that kind of thing. What I'm specifically talking about is, let's say if you give a wrong target, there are two ways to handle it. Number one is somebody on the server figures out, say, that's a wrong target, and I'm not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, which means that the server, in a sense, has a higher priority than the client, because the server rejects based on the server semantics what the client told him to do.
It's in the model, and
Which
there's
is
a
what-
limit, and toss it out.
Yeah, this is how it works today.
Yep.
So, and I'm asking here whether this is the right model as soon as we have add ephemeral data.
We have used the same model, but allowed, you noticed in there, we said people could turn off the inferential checks on a per model basis. Okay, so that's if that's your question and that's what you're honing in on, that is the place we decided to loosen the current models, and we are asking for feedback. Some people suggested that was a good idea. So now that we're at the same place, do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay, thank you. Russ.
Yeah, Russ White Erickson. I just think just a generic comment here is that we're getting some confusion between the concept of who owns something and who has permission to do something. And in I2RS, when we talk about ephemeral data, I don't really think of anyone as having ownership other than in the sense of they were the person who installed it and they get the callback if they're overwritten.
That is correct.
Okay, right. So just to make sure, because that's kind of seems to be a squishy area right this moment.
It is a squishy area, but you're right. If we're going to implement notifications with callback, and you remember that was a May versus month thing that we were talking about earlier, if you are going to implement notifications, that means that the data store must now keep
who owns
who you are.
Yeah, who owns it, but they don't own it. That's the problem is we in this concept of ownership, and it's not exactly what we think of.
No, it's really who's set the data.
And there's also the possibility that you don't track that. You just simply subscribe to the change stream.
Right,
and
you could do a pub sub model instead for that particular thing.
And you just happen to see it as, one of the things that you cared about was altered.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
So who's ever taking notes, or if you're not taking notes, if you just note that I need to make clarity on the referential checks and the ownership, and I'll deal with it in listening to the audio later. Thank you. By the way, these comments are great. Kent, what did I step on this time?
Hi, this is Kent. Two responses to Gert's comments. First, I think if the thermostat was only able to go to 30 degrees Celsius and the client tried to do 40 degrees Celsius, that would be in the model itself, the Yang model. And so it fails syntactic validation checking. So I would expect that to fail. The second thing, though, really it goes into this discussion that we're having with the open config group with the difference between intended versus applied. And so you could ask the thermostat to do something, but it may not be able to do it. And so, I mean, the intent is there, but it may not get applied. And so this goes into the whole synchronous versus asynchronous. And I think the intent of, sorry to use the word intent there, but the idea of I2RS is for it to be very fast and not to have these validation checks, semantic checks. So I would assume that it's only trying to edit the intended config, and there's no effort on the system to actually synchronously apply it. And
apply it. You're only working on intended. If you're working with the model that deals with open config. Deepak?
Yeah, I have just a clarification. Will we have 2 levels of config? Why I'm asking is in controller world, I see that, they first try to check whether controller will keep up with data path learning or not, especially with routes. So they program, and but if data path learning happens, that is given a priority. And once they see controller is keeping up with the host coming up, they remove the data path learning and go to the controller mode of operation. So so there is always a two level. If a rib has two routes, kind of thing, and one guy takes priority, and based on the mode, the fib gets programmed. So those kind of things will happen here.
If you had a rib model or an application where you were trying to use the two different sets of yes, is the short answer, but let me be a little bit more verbose so I can make sure I understood the question. If you had that case where you had an overriding ephemeral route, which is setting up routes in the fib until you can obtain stuff set up in the configuration or some other fibs, and then it would be pulled away, that would be a perfect example of an I2S application or killer app that would help. So excellent understanding.
Joe Clark, Cisco. In terms of intended versus applied, it seems like this would be a good use case for the traceability, to be able, without having the referential checks on, you could at least post-audit what was intended versus what was applied.
Yes, and that's why traceability and PubSub were what some of, you now see the logic of the working group chairs and our advice from our AD is we actually looked to make sure we had the strong traceability and strong PubSub agreed upon the working group before we went into the protocol. So yes, you have divined our intent.
Yeah, but my point is we'll probably add some text to that in our draft on traceability to make that
that would be awesome. That would be awesome. Any other questions? We will be glad to go, Prashant, into the topology model. It is a very simple topology model, so where we just change one endpoint. Any other questions on the route before I dive into that example? Okay, Jeff and I are happy if you've had enough and you're overloading. If you want to head off to lunch, we're just answering questions and going through things. I'm going to then go into the simple topology model. Alexander, I would appreciate if you would stay. Okay, this is the topology model. Okay, same beginning. The topology is, this may be out of date with the current one, but essentially, let me go down to it. We're looking at a network where we have a link and it connects between node 1 with interface 2.
Folks, please take your conversations outside. The meeting's not over. Thank you.
Yes, that was quietly leave. Thank you. Good. Okay. So, John, do you want me to go back to the model and place this, or okay? So, I figured you didn't need that of all people. So you have link 5 that's going between node 1 and node 2 and node 4, which is just like your next hop, which is why I used it. That's put into the intended config and actually installed. This is a configured link rather than a learned link. I need to be very careful there. Okay, then you say for some reason, again, you have the same problem. You have an attack on that node and you need to replace the link from that node to another. Actually, I went from that node to another. So you go from node 1 to 3 to link 1 to 4. So let me go back 1 point. See, you have node 1 to 2 and node 1 link 2 going to node 2 link 4. You then go from node 1 to a different link, right? Then you go to node 2.4. Did I think I've got that making sense? Here's your first one, 2.4. You're going, Jeff, will you hit the, no, it's not there.
My arms are not that long.
Nope, not that long, that's fine. Give me just a moment. Okay, I'm trying to change the source node that is, see if I can get this. If I have node 1 and I'm going, I've node 1 and I've got 1, 2. I'm going out of link 2, right? So node 1, I'm going out the second link. I'm connecting to node 2, the fourth link. Then all I really do is say that that link has been trashed for some reason. Something affected it, just like my next hop was affected. And all I'm doing is changing to the third starting link on that node and going to the same thing. It's just sort of like on a link basis, just like changing it. So is that a rational thing, or did I give a wrong example because that wouldn't be done? Node 1. Go ahead, Alex. If I've got the wrong example, please say that I've misunderstood this.
No, I think the example is fine. I'm only wondering, actually, it might be good actually to have actually a depiction of topology. But I think basically there's also termination points. And I think when you say go from a node, well, you have nodes and links.
Right.
And the connection points are the termination points. So I think when you say you go from node 1, link to link 3,
I'm describing the termination point.
Right.
I'm saying
Yes.
I'm going from termination point, describe 1, 2 to termination point described 1, 3. And so if that's the confusion, I was trying to make it simple for people who don't deal with termination points. So all you're doing is changing the termination point in the link. And that's an ephemeral, simple change, just like the next hop. So all you're doing is you've got your first configuration and you're changing from source 1, 2 to source 3. Now, maybe I got my numbers wrong, but essentially you're doing the same thing, only you're setting the termination point in a new ephemeral piece. I obviously have the example wrong, so if you would help me correct it on the slides, I will upload a new one. But you're just changing the terminal, and all you do when you change the termination point, Sean, is you flag it ephemeral. Just like a route, next hop, you change the termination point. You can change a link, you can change a termination point, you can change a node. And all you'd have to do is put question mark ephemeral in your routing, in your topology. I'd like to find out what I messed up. So if you guys would send me a private note on why it's confusing. Okay, that's the link, not much. And I think, Yufeng, it should align with what you guys are doing in T's, right? I mean, it's just changing termination point, changing a link. We're just going to mark it ephemeral. It's not a big, so we should be able, Himanshu and Yufeng, we should be able to align with what you're doing. And if we need to do an ephemeral piece on top, it's just data store equivalent. I know it seems rather simple, but we're not opposed to having a simple solution that's workable today. I mean, that's where we're going. Any other questions on this model, in anything on it, concerns? If you don't want to talk in public, send Jeff and I a comment. This is our first blush. If we've missed something and you think it's really, if you don't understand us, ask questions. If you think it's broken, tell us. If you think it's a good idea, gee, we'd like to hear that too. Any other questions? Okay, it's time over. We'll adjourn. Thank you again. Thanks again to our NetConf aide and to Kent, who's gone to lunch. Oh, and the person who lent me the,
That was
thank
me,
you.
Sue.
你现在也关注这个 I2S 哈？一块吃饭去啊？一块吃饭去。对面有个 food court mall 对面，对，蛮多的，但人很多。对，人很多。所以我就说今天的那个有照了哈。啊。今天的天气是最干的，以后公司就要让我们在这边不要。对呀，你说啥呢？鞋子也废掉了。最好的 justification。他们的限制啊，我们那个我们出差费用低，所以只能住小旅馆。没附近，然后约到了。哦。好像可能是家里的你的那个东西，但是它又复杂，把一些其他的东西，我都觉得都搞不清楚。哎，还有它里面讲说用 I2S 能配置那个ephemeral 的数据，然后又能配置non ephemeral 是什么意思？是什么意思？就是说。问他那种没听懂，他是不是不太懂？关键场地方。
Does that cause, does that then cause the aging?